It's always a pleasure to chat with my British Handball Association colleagues, Anna Garside. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
And Paul Bray. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ian.
Now, many people in British Handball and the European and World Handball will know Paul, not only in his role as the chair of British Handball, but from his commentating work. Anna, you, like me, are relatively new to the sport, although you've got a strong background in sports science and working with other sports. So what was it that attracted you to get involved in our sport?
So I think at the time I was working with British show jumping, which is it's primarily an individual sport, although it has still got team events. But I think my interest has always been within the team element. So I was really looking to kind of get back into a team sport. My interest and experience obviously is within the high performance environment. And then specifically for British handball, I see handball has this huge kind of scope across Europe, and there's just huge potential within the UK of where it can go. And I think for me, especially at that point, there's a real opportunity within British handball, which is why it kind of ticked all the boxes for me in terms of it being a team sport and having that great opportunity and potential of where it can really go.
Excellent. And did you find the scale of the game in European terms and world terms quite surprising? Or what was your awareness of handball before you got involved?
Yeah, I was really shocked actually in how big it really was across Europe. I knew it personally from kind of a university level within Britain, and then just from an Olympics sort of level across the world. But it was only once I'd got really involved, especially understanding that club element and the professionalism of it across Europe, of that scale of how professional it really is. That was a definite shock, a welcome shock, I think.
Some amazing numbers, and you would know as our performance director, having been integral to putting together the bid for UK sport, successful bid for UK sport, well done. Just how big the game is globally, some huge numbers, 35 million registered players, I think, 1 billion people watching finals and so on. Just an amazing scale.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And I think that's something that's really gone to our benefit at the moment in terms of the UK sport bid, being able to show to them that it's a sport that is still growing across the world. It's a really exciting sport. And then especially within the bid, we really looked into the home nations and at what those participation level figures are. And especially within Scotland, looking across kind of that school level and primary school level, the numbers are huge and they're growing more and more. And I think, especially for UK sport, they've seen where we can be as British handball and where we can sit as a sport within the world as well, and how big it really is.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a wee bit about working with UK sport and the team that you pulled together to mount the successful bid?
Yeah, so in terms of off the board, there was myself, Paul, and Lucy, who really led from the board front, which was a huge effort. And I'm very thankful to all of them and the wider board, of course. But we really linked in with the performance group. So the performance group, if people aren't aware, is comprised of the GB coaches. And then we've got an England and a Scottish rep on there, and also the team managers for the GB team. So it was a real collective effort across everybody within those areas from both the home nations and on the board as well. And I think we're definitely thankful for everyone's input into that, as the last year was a lot of work going into that, but a real success. So we're obviously really happy with that.
And before we talk about the outcome of the bid process, what sort of inputs, what sort of information did you have to provide the UK sport? What sort of context? How did that work?
So the bid process for the UK sport funding, although we were going for a new fund, was identical to all the other world-class programmes. So we're going through the same bidding process with the same types of information as British Cycling, for example, who are awarded millions of pounds every cycle, ironically, and they're very successful with it. So we are going through the exact same process that they are. So we have to produce a performance strategy, which for us was a very welcome approach from UK sport this time, that it was a real 12-year strategy that we had to put forward. So not just 4 years and looking at how we could medal in say Paris or in Tokyo even. It's really looking at that longer term vision and kind of looking towards LA and further than that. So as part of that, it meant that we were able to provide the information such as the progression level and that participation level of who's really coming through. And then within that, it was also our performance pathway. What do we have in place now? And where do we want it to be? And how do we get there? So we spent a long time reaching out to other nations, reaching out to the EHF and the IHF to get as much kind of statistical evidence, research evidence to provide, I suppose, a real research and scientific based approach to prove exactly how we can take our current position forward over the next 12 years, and why we know it will work, because we've seen it work in the likes of Portugal, for example, and Norway and places like that, and trying to adopt some of the same techniques that they may have used over the past few years, and putting that into ultimately into just a one or two documents that actually went forward comprising of all of that information.
Excellent. And the outcome, I think we've seen a bit of press coverage in the last couple of weeks, but would you like to tell us about the support that's coming from UK sport going forward?
Yes, so originally we'd applied for progression funding. So that was looking very much at those, the sports that are going to medal in Paris. And we'd already made it very clear that we weren't focusing on Paris. We were focusing more towards that 2032 and maybe even the next Olympics after that. So we were welcome to hear from UK Sport that they did award progression funding. And then since then, they've now awarded to sports such as ourselves a further national squad support fund, which is primarily focusing on the senior squads. And we've been awarded an initial 375,000 for that, so cover those 4 years, dependent on kind of funding agreements as we go over that period. Thanks a lot, Ian.
Paul, you've obviously been around this scene a long time, very long time.
I have. The hair gives it away, I think.
You know what they say, better grey hair than no hair. How do you think this sea change, not just in funding but recognition, are going to help us push on to the next level?
I mean, this is such a huge step change for us, and you know, it's a process we've been running at now for about 3 years in reality, because we were part of this process of trying to make UK sport rethink the no compromise approach that was there before, whereby you could only get funded if you were likely to medal at the next Olympics. And we kept on saying, but this is the chicken and egg situation, that we can't medal if you don't fund us, but you won't fund us if we won't medal. And we're just going to have this same conversation every 4 years until something changes. And so we did extensive lobbying starting about 3 years ago with government officials, with ministers, with shadow ministers, with UK Sport. And actually, you know, Catherine Granger at UK Sport was really receptive and spent a lot of time talking to us. And we worked together with other sports that were in a similar situation to us and were unfunded. And I think very slowly we've managed to kind of turn this around like a large ship and get it back into waters where we did have a fund that we potentially could challenge and get some support from. So that was hugely important. And receiving the funding is absolutely crucial to the sport, because the reality is that we have over the past 6 years had some funding from the International Handball Federation, and that is hugely, hugely welcome, because, you know, 6 years ago we didn't have national teams. We'd had this hiatus after the London 2012 games, and then in 2015 we restarted using this IHF money, which was shared with the SHA and the EHA for development purposes, but the BHA element, the British Handball one, was used to fund just a couple of age group teams at the time. And the idea was to build from the bottom. So we started with the women's under 17s and men's under 18s. And then bit by bit, as they grew up and they went through their development stage, we then moved up the next age group and then the next. And now, of course, we have the 6 squads that we're going to stick with. so a senior and 2 age group squads for men and women. And that's allowed us to do that with the IHF funding, and we'll be pushing to try and get some more of that. But the senior teams have not been funded since London 2012. And so this is really going to allow us to make a very, very big difference. And as Anna said, as part of our bid, I mean, we submitted, I think 3 core documents, but there were probably 17 supporting documents behind it. But as she alluded, one of the main documents is this new performance strategy. And it's a really, really important piece of work. It's one we knew would work whether we were funded or not. We could adapt it either way, but with funding, it really gives us an opportunity to look more positively to the future and hope that we can impress and meet the targets enough with UK Sport that they will move us up through the different funding tiers and give us more funding. So the funding will be absolutely critical for us to be able to be a lot more competitive going forwards. It's also really, really significant that UK Sport recognises handball now as a sport that should get support. And let's not forget that the funding we've received is the maximum they could give under this national squad funding program. So we made a strong enough case to get the maximum out of that fund. So that was a really great job done by Anna and Lucy, the project team, and we put a huge amount of effort in sleepless nights, and then the performance group and the rest of the board pitched in as well to help, and that was very important. And it's worth saying, that the strategy was developed. It's a British Handball GB team strategy, but it was developed very closely with Scottish Handball and with England Handball. And I think that's where the success of our relationship is, that, we all worked at this together and we all know that we have a role to play. So it really is an important step, both in terms of, one, having the funding for the national teams now, secondly, getting the recognition from UK Sport. And as we said before, we had this gap after London 2012 when the GB teams kind of disappeared. And I heard a lot of people say, we've lost our legacy. And I've always said, we've lost momentum with the GB teams, but we certainly haven't lost the legacy, quite the opposite. I mean, you look at some of the work that Scottish Handball and England Handball have done in all of that time, and you continue to receive funding from Sport Scotland, and England got some from Sport England. There's been tremendous development. And for the GB teams, you can see that with more players and more talented players coming through. So we haven't lost the legacy. It's still very much here. We're simply moving on to a new tier, I think, and a new level.
I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed the way you've shown that a relatively small sport, can take the performance development seriously and take a professional approach, in spite of not being the biggest, by pulling in that expertise from across its members, by pulling in the expertise from across Europe and the world, leveraging your contacts, Paul, leveraging your sports science background. Anna, frankly, I don't know which I'm more impressed with. Paul for sticking with it all these years, or Anna for not being daunted by the prospect. So really well done. And you alluded, really well there, Paul, I think, to the partnership. For me getting involved in British Handball, this has been it was a surprise, because I thought I was volunteering to help with Scottish Handball, but it was a very welcome surprise, when I got to join the British Handball Board. And what most delighted me really was this partnership ethos. It didn't feel like a top-down governance thing. It's not a mechanism to push stuff down. It's a 50-50 collaboration to try and develop the sport in terms of grassroots, and particularly where British Handball hat on, look at that performance route. So that was all a real bonus for me as well. How do you think having this opportunity that you've generated now, this step change, Paul, will help us attract more people into the game across UK and more diverse people across the UK into the game?
I think this is part of the bigger picture of doing that exact role, and to come back to the earlier point you made about British Handball, British Handball has only 2 members, Scottish Handball and England Handball. And therefore, it's very important for us to work together. We have seen examples in some other sports where you've got a British body and the home country bodies, and it doesn't work. They all seem to be pulling in different directions. They've all got different views about how to approach everything. And I think we've worked very hard to make sure that we're pulling in the same direction. we have a talent pathway. And that talent pathway doesn't work without British Handball, and it doesn't work without Scottish Handball or England Handball. Everyone's in there. It's a pyramid where everyone has a role to play. And I think why British Handball works so well as a partnership is that we all know we have very distinct roles, and we all know what they are, and we've agreed how we need to pull in the same direction and how that pathway is connected. And putting aside the funding, which is so important, the talent pathway itself, I see that as the GB element sitting at the top bit of the pyramid is just the aspirational bit. It's what the young players coming into the sport are going to come along as a talented athlete to a handball session, really enjoy it, and say to the coach at the end of the session, I really enjoyed this. This is fantastic, So where could I go with handball? And if you say to them, well, you could play for the club up the road, they'll go, yeah, fantastic. I want to do that. And then what? And you go, well, actually, that's kind of it, because we don't have any GB teams, So that's as far as your aspirations concerned. Well, it's not much of a talent pathway, because that pathway kind of peters out halfway through the field and you don't get anywhere. So we have a role as an aspirational element there to encourage players to come along and be part of the handball pyramid and join in at the bottom. And so we feel we're playing a role there. And equally, we can't go anywhere unless Scottish Handball and England Handball are developing good pathways at the grassroots level and bringing players all the way up through to the 18 age group who are highly talented players that you can bring into the GB squads. And neither works without the other. We need Scottish handball to be successful in that respect, to bring those players through. Otherwise, we can't progress, we won't get the funding, and eventually it's a vicious circle and you end up disappearing again, which I don't think is going to happen now. And I think we're very well connected. So I think the funding and the fact that we've got such a good relationship and that we've got very distinct areas that we're working on, and that we've got a performance group at British Handball that has as voting members on board the Scottish and England performance leads. So we know that when we're making decisions, they're being made with the best interests of everybody. And we know that we're not proposing ideas that we're then going to take back to England or Scotland and you're going to say, it doesn't work. We know they work because we developed them together. And that's what's so important to us, what I hope will lead to future success for GB teams, but also future success in terms of attracting thousands of new players to the sport, which in itself also makes the sport more attractive for the likes of UK sport to look at and go, they're being very successful, and the more grassroots development they've got, the more likely they are to succeed at the top in time.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we've got the best kept secret in terms of a wonderful team sport. And Anna, what are your thoughts on how we can help Scotland play its part in this re-energised performance level? What are the sort of things the board is doing or thinking of doing to help our young Scottish players get involved at that performance level and see the opportunities?
Yeah, so I think, as Paul's already mentioned a few times, this 12-year performance strategy that is now in place, although it was part of the UK sport bid, this is really underpinning how we are moving, and it's what we would have been putting in place with or without the funding. And a big part of that, as we've said, this has been developed by the performance group, which has a huge Scottish and English input into how it is driven, how it happens. And it's split into 4 areas. So we split it across player development, coach development, competition opportunities, along with a female kind of strategy element alongside that as well. And within each of these 4 areas, there are areas which have to come from within Scotland and England. And this is very much where Scotland kind of play their part, and how British Handball can also play their part for the Scottish players and coaches and referees and everyone else involved as well. So one area we're looking at is the player development aspect. We've developed a GB blueprint, which was also part of the bid, but has also been in development for quite a while. And this, I suppose, is a bit of an educational piece. It shows what would a GB player look at all levels. So it provides this kind of accessible knowledge of what a GB player should be, what those technicalities are, what those skills are, what those abilities are. And also for a coach, how do they coach that? How can they input that? So this already has now been implemented to the home nation. So within Scotland, this is something that the coaches are now being aware of. They know they have hold of this, the players can have hold of this, so that they can start looking at from such a young age to go, right, if I want to be on a GB team, then I need to develop in these areas. I need to develop these skills. And this is what our current GB coaches are looking for. So it's helping put them in the best place to be as well prepared as they can be, to be seen and to put themselves forward and be confident in themselves as players to come forward for the GB teams, along with the coaches as well, developing their skills and aligning with the GB pathway. Another aspect of that is then the competition element. So one part of this are the British Handball playoffs. So these have been awarded obviously to Scotland now for the next 3 years, which I think provides a really good opportunity to just develop that event, and it raises the profile of that event and the sport across Scotland as well. So although it's kind of a British level, that's bringing it back down into Scotland and down to the community as well. So it's not just purely a performance aspect and really reaching out. And then alongside that, I've just mentioned the kind of female strategy. So there's some bits where we're working collaboratively on this specific female development as well. And that isn't just at a GB level. This is really reaching down into the communities. How do you develop a female athlete from the bottom? How can we invite more female coaches, more female referees, more female team managers into the game? And this is where we're really working with Scotland Handball to reach into the community and how to do that. And then alongside that, the idea is to look to how we can invite people to shadow within the GB teams, get some of that experience, whether that's through mentoring programs or just coming along to some of those elements, or linking up with some of the team managers to gain that experience. We're trying to make it as accessible and inclusive as possible by, in theory, I suppose, putting it on the doorstep, putting it in front of everyone's faces of how to be involved. And then alongside that, just from a more general GB perspective, where it's viable, we're ensuring that there's camps happening in Scotland and in England. It's not just in one place. So it's as easy as possible for everyone to be involved, because I mean, from our perspective, the more people you have to choose from, you've got a bigger talent pool. The idea is you should then be more successful because you've got more to choose from. It generates more competition, and raises the game of everyone, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I know from speaking to some of our young Scottish athletes who are involved in the GB programme, how much they absolutely value that level of opportunity. I think even with a close partnership like ours, there are obvious logistical challenges, especially for a small sport. There are obviously geographical challenges. I know we're working hard to try and make sure we harmonise our approaches in the current environment with COVID, and make sure that Scottish and English athletes have the opportunity to be involved in GB squads safely. So having common standards, becomes really important, because it's a way to extend that, shared framework without necessarily having to travel and necessarily have to worry about, all the time being in the same place. It's a huge boon to us in Scotland, putting my SHA hat on for a minute, to know that we have the British playoffs to build around for 3 years too, because it gives us a run at it, and that will help everybody, I think, to raise profile and to plan, just to have a wee bit of predictability, which I think we all need off the back of the last year or so, or at least would welcome to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you both this question, and it'd be interesting if you get different answers given your different lengths of time involved in the game. As you know, next year's the 50th anniversary of the SHA. So, not a lot of people know that up here either. The game's got a long history, a long legacy, a very dedicated Scottish handball family who've kept a terrific game going through all the ups and downs that Paul's described. So my question to both of you, and I think I'll start with Paul, is what do you think the next 50 years will bring Scottish and British handball?
Well, it's funny. I mean, maybe I can turn the clock back first before I do it, because I look back to my playing days, and they are a while back now, and they're not far off 50 years backwards. If I look back to the 70s and 80s with my playing days in the GB squad, and we think to some of the Scottish players we had around in those days, the Billy Hayburn or Alan Govan and Stuart Cullen, who were great names, and great athletes in the squad. you know, and you think you bring up more recently, you know, Lynn McCafferty leading out a Great Britain team for the very first time ever in Olympic game at London 2012. And you said earlier, you know, we've got great Scottish players coming through the SHA talent pathway at the moment. Craig McClelland and Chris White, who are playing professionally in Portugal. And looking ahead, that's where we'd like to see some of the changes is, you know, more players going abroad and playing in some of these top level professional leagues around Europe. And then hopefully in time, then our leagues will become strong, and then players will be able to develop here in the UK, you know, and still go abroad by all means, but they will have more choice then. And we are seeing increasingly numbers of players going abroad. I've mentioned Craig and Chris, but, you know, Ross Strachan and Jack Lees are other examples of great players who are key to the GB setup at the moment. You know, looking ahead 50 years, we're putting aside, of course, any politics and where that might take us, but I still hope that there will be a very close relationship between us in 50 years' time. As it stands at the moment, I think we're well set for that. We're working well together. I can see Scottish handball developing really, really well. The structure brings through quality players. And there's a great program in terms of grassroots development at schools and with the youth clubs and building them up. And I know when I've been up to Scotland and I've come up for British playoffs and other sessions, and you always build youth events around them, and it's always very well attended and some great quality of play. And I can see that really developing well over the years. And, you know, in Scottish handball being in a very good position to do that, you know, especially with the commitment and the people you have at the moment. And I hope that in 50 years' time, we'll have had a GB team at the Olympics with Scottish players in there. We'll be regulars at the Euros and World Championships, and we'll still be working very closely together on the GB setup to develop that, as well as seeing some really fantastic grassroots and leagues played in domestic competition in the UK.
A fantastic vision. You and I will be in our bath chairs watching that. Anna, what do you see?
I might be in the Guinness Book of Records if I'm doing that by then.
Anna, what do you see for
I
Scottish
thought
handball next?
I thought I was about to contradict Paul when he started talking about everyone being in European leagues, and say that I would hope that we may have a professional league within the UK. That would be a lovely outlook. I mean, we'll have to see how far it can go. I think absolutely seeing teams back in the Olympics, we will see GB teams in the Olympics with the way that we're going within that 50-year period. And I think, as Paul said, that school level, especially within Scotland, the way it already is, I think in less than another 50 years, we'll see it as one of those chosen sports across all of the schools, especially within Scotland, as being that one of those key core sports that is taken up by school children. And that will only help drive into what we will hopefully see as a professional league within the UK, alongside if they want to go abroad as well. However, we want to make it as easy as possible.
Excellent. Thank you for putting your forecasting hats on there and get your crystal balls out and looking. Very insightful, as indeed, you know, I found all the conversation really insightful. Well done. Thanks for sharing that. You know, my personal view is, if your success in opening up this new vista for British handball is anything to go by, then collaboration is key. Who knows what the future is going to bring, but collaboration has got to be key. Hopefully, as we return to something a bit more normal, we'll be able to welcome you for the 50th anniversary celebrations next year. I know we'll be talking beforehand, and hopefully I'll be seeing you beforehand. But listen, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Really appreciate it, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.